Hi, I'm Mark Jolin. It might come as no surprise that our shelters are there for people experiencing homelessness. But during and after disaster, not only will the number of people needing shelter increase, but most of these new people have just been displaced from their home, maybe that same day. And many have probably never experienced anything like this in their lives. So you can imagine that in an emergency, we need to be very careful about our assumptions and our actions, not to mention we want to know what services are available. So today, you'll hear from some experts in homeless services in the region. Annette Evans of the Department of Housing Services in Washington County. She has 11 years of experience in homeless crisis response planning. Gabriel Court has been providing shelter to people in crisis for several years as the Emergency Operations Manager for Transition Projects in Portland. And Laura Ellsworth comes to us from the Council for the Homeless in Vancouver, which has been the coordinated entry point to the homeless crisis system in Clark County for almost 30 years. These experts are going to share some of their experience in shelters so that you can feel confident approaching issues of homelessness with our values of universal access, respect, compassion, and dignity, and with all of the available resources at your disposal. So let's go pay them a visit.
Hi, I'm Laura Ellsworth, and thank you for taking the time to learn about homeless services and about trauma-informed care for people experiencing homelessness, and about what it is like to work in a shelter environment. First, let's recognize that everyone staying overnight at a DRC is experiencing homelessness at that point in time because they are no longer in their home. Simple as that. You may see a whole range of people who come into the DRC, depending on the situation. That's why it's never good to assume that you know somebody's story when going into any kind of shelter, and in particular, it's an important part of trauma-informed care that we never assume people haven't experienced trauma. You're probably familiar with the concept of trauma-informed care, and it's really important. A lot of working in this type of environment is about being trauma-informed. If you'd like to learn more about what we talk about here today, Multnomah County has another video about the trauma-informed approach that you can find in resources. As it turns out, trauma is really pretty bad for you, even purely social and emotional trauma, and its effect can build up over the course of someone's life, even if it appears that they've survived trauma just fine. So, we said we shouldn't make assumptions about people, but there's one assumption it is safe to make. 100% of the guests in a DRC have experienced trauma in their lives. Many of them are probably experiencing trauma at the time. So, be a good listener, be kind, and be calm. You should feel free to approach guests and ask what kind of services they're looking for. That way you can follow our value of respect and treat them how they want to be treated.
Hi, I'm Gabriel Court. Being a good listener is extra important. You may be the first person someone's interacted with in a long time. So your kind, positive, helpful interaction may be the difference between whether or not a person wants to seek services at all. And that difference might even help them move forward on a path to something else. Hopefully, to a situation where they aren't experiencing homelessness anymore. By the way, the reason we talk about someone who's experiencing homelessness is because they're not always going to be homeless. The idea is to put the person before their situation. They're not themselves a homeless person. They're experiencing homelessness at this moment in time. 2 days from now or a year from now, their life could be entirely different. You may have seen the segment of this series that's about our values and guiding principles. And I've mentioned some of those values a couple times already. One of those values is universal access, but still, there are going to be lots of people who are resistant to coming in. Sometimes that's because they don't think they can bring their pets or their personal items with them. For example, in our segment on animals in emergency shelters, we talked about how 44% of people who chose not to evacuate from Hurricane Katrina reported they didn't want to leave their pets. So, we want to eliminate barriers to people accessing our services when we can. But remember that shelters run by different organizations have different guidance. Here in Multnomah County, for example, we say that all are welcome, including people with their pets and their stuff. We treat pets of any kind as family. You may also remember from the guiding principles that we always keep families together. We've seen dogs, cats, squirrels, rats, birds, snakes, iguanas, ferrets, you name it. If you need more guidance about our pets in Disaster Resource Center, don't forget that you can check out the animals segment of this video series.
Hi, I'm Annette Evans. We also recognize that our guests' stuff is their home. These belongings may be everything they have. We want them to be able to bring those items and keep them safe. Of course, there is some limit to how many belongings any one person can bring. If someone comes with too much stuff, you should check with your supervisor to problem solve the situation. Here in Washington County, we provide lockers where people can store the stuff that they can't keep with them. There are cases when guests have resisted coming to shelters and are only there because it's really cold or really hot. They may have been strongly encouraged by outreach workers or emergency personnel to come, but aren't happy to be there. In this situation, a guest might be pretty impatient or might have an emotional outburst where you may feel the need to tell your supervisor that more resources are needed. Guests are always free to come and go as they please. However, I do always try to talk with them and keep them inside if I think it isn't safe for them to leave. If someone wants to leave and they're not dressed for the cold, I'll usually call someone to come and assist them. A supervisor may be able to change the person's mind or request help from someone who can figure out whether the person is a risk to themselves. Sheltering can take place both indoors and outdoors. If people have a car or an RV that they want to sleep in, we'll do our best to provide a place for them to do that. Some people don't want to be inside. It's just not a comfortable place for them. As always, we try to meet people where they're at in whatever way we can and be flexible and solve problems to meet their needs.
One occasion when we activate disaster resource centers is during severe weather. That decision is made on a case-by-case basis and can vary by county. So I can't tell you exactly what temperature it needs to be for any particular DRC to be activated, but the idea for us is to cover the gap in shelter capacity for people who can't be taken in by other community partners. One last thing we should talk about is your own comfort working in a disaster resource center. On one hand, if you're ever feeling uncomfortable with what you're doing or something is beyond your skill level, you need to feel free to let someone else come in to assist or to take over that task. In short, if you're not comfortable doing something, then you don't need to be doing it. In fact, it's usually better if you don't. On the other hand, I think that knowing what to expect will take a lot of the discomfort out of the experience. I know the first time I worked in a shelter, I just didn't really know what to expect. So let me give you a look into what it's like to work in a shelter. You might feel overwhelmed with the sights, the sounds, and the smells in a disaster resource center. And our guests often feel the same way. The lights might be brighter than what they're used to, or there may be a lot of loud people and sounds. You may be exposed to a lot of different smells, people's pets, wet belongings, and in some cases, people who haven't had access to a shower or clean clothes in a long time. These are all things we expect when we work in a shelter. There's one myth that I'd like to bust though. People always think that there are going to be bugs, like lice or bed bugs, coming into the shelter system. The truth is, I think you have a better chance of catching those bugs riding any mass transit system. So that's not something I particularly worry about. However, communicable disease is a serious topic, and we'll dive into that in more depth in a separate video segment.
All right, today we covered a bunch of topics about homeless services in the event of a disaster. What it means to experience homelessness, why we should approach everyone with the assumption that they've experienced trauma, how to help people accept assistance, and what it'll actually be like in the shelter. Thank you very much for taking the time to learn about how you can improve a person's experience of homelessness in an emergency. And don't forget that we have a lot more topics available to help you be confident and effective in a disaster resource center. Thanks for watching.